Welcome to Detective Reddington's office. Take a seat and listen to this story. It will be interesting. I arrived at the hotel completely exhausted, and all I wanted was to finally get some sleep. But just as I dropped my bag, my phone buzzed. It was my boss with yet another last-minute request. He needed me back at the office by 8 a.m. No exceptions. I let out a deep sigh, realizing I'd need to book a flight, pack up again, and head to the airport. It was too late to call my wife, Kathy. Doing so would only wake the kids. So, I decided I'd just head home, quietly grab what I needed, and be on my way. The house was dark, with only a faint light coming from our bedroom. Moving silently down the hall, I suddenly heard voices, hers and another man's. My heart sank. The kids were probably staying with her sister, I thought as I began piecing it all together. Kathy was cheating on me. My grandfather's old advice echoed in my head. Stay calm. Don't act in anger. I took a few deep breaths, trying to suppress the fury that could easily take control. I decided not to confront her. Not yet, anyway. I needed proof. I pulled out the new smartphone issued to me at work, which had a great camera, a strong mic, and a battery-saving mode. Remaining hidden in the shadows, I started recording, forcing myself to push down the hurt. But as I listened to what they were saying, something inside me snapped, and I couldn't hold back anymore. I stormed into the room and hit the stranger. Later, I found out his name was Tom. We fought until I finally forced him out of the house. Kathy cowered in the corner, looking completely terrified. Get over here, I said, my voice shaking but firm. It felt surreal, like I was watching it all from outside myself. It was one of those moments when my anger took over so strongly that I could barely remember what happened afterward. Get over here, I repeated, and she approached trembling. Arthur, please, I'm so sorry, she whimpered, barely able to speak. My face twisted with disgust. Save the apologies, Kathy. And what about all those other times with Tom? Do you regret those too? Her face froze, and she could barely muster a response. You'll pack your things and be gone by noon, I told her, pointing at the bed. Take everything in here, especially the bed, and leave my things on the floor. Respect what's mine. She nodded, looking completely broken, and as I left the room, I felt the anger slowly begin to fade. I grabbed my bags, tossed them into the car, and gave one last look around the yard before getting into the driver's seat. Thankfully, Tom was nowhere in sight. When I saw my reflection in the mirror, I realized I looked terrible. My nose was broken, my shirt bloodied. Not exactly the best look, but I barely felt any pain. The adrenaline was still coursing through me. I drove to the nearest hospital. The doctor quickly assessed me. A broken nose, a couple of cracked ribs, a possible concussion, and a collection of cuts and bruises. They wanted me to stay for observation, but I refused. I had work to get back to and needed to clear my head. When the police arrived, I didn't give them all the details. I just said I'd been attacked and didn't remember much. Tom hadn't shown up at the hospital either, which was for the best, less to explain. After leaving the hospital, I went straight to the office where my boss, Rachel Parker, was working in her office. She noticed my condition and, without asking questions, allowed me to use her bathroom to clean up. When I finished, I saw Kathy's brother in the lobby, looking just as bruised and battered as I felt. He'd probably heard about everything and come to confront me. Pulling myself together, I entered Rachel's office and gave her a quick rundown of what had happened. She listened quietly and then said, I know a good divorce lawyer, Fiona. We went to college together. She'll help you. After a quick call to Fiona, Rachel returned and told me, she can see you this morning. I thanked her and nodded. Over the next hour, Rachel and I worked on a few urgent tasks before I headed to meet Fiona. My mind was racing with thoughts about how all of this would affect my kids and our lives, but I knew that divorce was the only option. Fiona arrived promptly and listened to my story without asking too many questions. I showed her the recording, where Tom asked Kathy if he was more important to her than the kids. Her response was chilling. I'm yours. I don't care about them. Fiona and Rachel exchanged glances, both visibly shocked by what they'd heard. I want full custody of the kids, I said firmly. Even if that means sacrificing a large part of my assets. I don't want her to have any control over them. Fiona cautiously warned me that full custody would be a challenge, even with the recording, as Kathy might try to dismiss it as something said in the heat of the moment. She prepared the necessary documents, gave me her card, and advised me to stay calm, no matter how difficult it might be. I nodded, grateful for her support. As I returned to work, a nervous tension filled me. I realized that my anger was still simmering, just waiting to boil over. I told Rachel I'd be out for an hour or two to handle some personal matters. She understood and wished me luck. Driving home, I struggled to keep my anger under control, knowing that the hardest part was yet to come. When I arrived, there was already a moving truck in the driveway, and Kathy's brothers were helping her load up the furniture. 2 police cars were parked on the curb, and I noticed 3 officers observing the scene. I pulled out my laptop, approached the officers, and said, "I have a recording that might explain everything that happened last night. Would you like to see it?" The lead officer, a tough-looking woman, gave me a long look. "Are you Arthur Lane, Kathy's husband?" I confirmed, assuring her I was willing to cooperate fully. I started playing the recording, turning up the volume so that everyone nearby could hear. When it got to the part where Kathy said she didn't care about the kids, she stumbled, nearly dropping a box. Her face went pale as a small bag of white powder fell out of the box. The officer immediately noticed it. "Sergeant, you might want to check that out," I said, pointing to the powder. The sergeant called for backup and moved toward Kathy. I remembered a detail from the recording, where I saw a line of white powder on the bedroom mirror, and showed it to another officer. He nodded and signaled the sergeant over. She quickly handcuffed Kathy, who began to cry, while her brothers looked on in shock. "What's happening?" I asked, trying to process everything. "Your wife is being arrested for possession of a controlled substance. We'll verify it with tests, but it seems she's been using it," the sergeant replied. "And what about my kids? When can I get them?" I asked, my concern growing. "Where are they?" she asked, her tone softening. "They're with her parents, about 5 miles from here." The sergeant paused, then nodded. "If I were you, I'd go get them right now. Your wife is in custody, so you have the right." A wave of relief mixed with anxiety washed over me as I assured her I'd go straight there to get my kids. The sergeant promised to accompany me to Kathy's parents' house to ensure everything went smoothly. I thanked her and left to bring my kids home, determined to give them a safe and stable life. Here's the continuation of the translated story. When we arrived at Kathy's parents' house, the sergeant accompanied me to reinforce my right to take the kids home. Her parents didn't put up any resistance. They'd never liked me much, and they likely already knew what had happened. My kids, especially my 5-year-old daughter, Hope, lit up when they saw me. Hope immediately started begging to ride in the police car, while my 3-year-old son, Jack, wanted to sit on Aunt Rose's lap as I introduced the sergeant to them. Rose, the sergeant, smiled a little, throwing me an amused glance when I let the kids call her that. "Aunt Rose, will you come visit us?" Hope asked, her eyes wide with excitement. Rose looked slightly embarrassed but answered, "I can't, sweetie. I have a lot of work." I couldn't help but throw in, casually, "You're free for dinner tomorrow at 6, right? Hope, you can show Aunt Rose your doll collection." Hope's face lit up instantly. Rose gave me a surprised look, but eventually agreed with a slight shake of her head. "All right, I'll bring some ice cream for you guys," she said, smiling at the kids. She drove us back to my office, and the kids were thrilled to ride in a police car. When she dropped us off, I noticed the look of thoughtful conflict on her face, as if she was still processing everything. The next day, I left the kids at the daycare in our building and went straight to Rachel's office to get some work done. My body still ached from all the bruises, but the emotional pain from Kathy's betrayal hurt even more. That evening, I ordered pizza for dinner, and when the kids asked about their mom, I gently explained that we'd had a big argument, but that both of us still loved them. "It's okay, Daddy. As long as you're here, we're happy," Hope said, hugging me tightly. Her words struck me deeply because I realized how many nights they had spent with their grandparents while Kathy was off doing who knows what. I swallowed my disappointment and hugged them, promising myself they'd always come first. That night, I decided to take control of our finances. I transferred most of our joint savings to my personal account and canceled our shared credit cards. I knew that I'd need to secure any other assets and documents the next day. Life was changing fast, but I was determined to start anew, free from the weight of betrayal. The next morning, I woke up to my kids gently shaking me awake. Someone was ringing the doorbell. Checking my phone, I saw a message from Sue, the nanny. "Mr. Lane, this is Sue from the nanny agency. Are you home?" she asked when I answered. I quickly explained that the key was under the mat and invited her in. Sue immediately got to work, helping Hope get ready for daycare and keeping an eye on Jack. Her calm confidence was reassuring, allowing me to finally take a breath. Later that day, I received a package from Fiona, temporary custody papers and a restraining order against Kathy. I didn't even have to go to the office. A courier had delivered everything. After everything that had happened, I was relieved to avoid more public encounters. Later that day, I went to the bank, where I moved all our valuables to a new safe deposit box and opened a separate account. Although the divorce process had only just begun, I didn't want Kathy to misuse any of our money. I left her share untouched but ensured that everything was safeguarded. That evening, Sue came back to help with the kids, and Rose arrived, as promised, much to Hope's delight. Hope immediately started asking about Rose's police gear, but Rose carefully explained how dangerous real weapons were, satisfying her curiosity. I noticed Rose watching me with a concerned look. She probably understood how difficult things had become. I decided to play it up a bit, pretending to feel slightly dizzy, and thanked her silently for staying to help with the kids. Later that night, Rose and I sat on the couch while the kids drifted off to sleep. I told her more about my situation with Kathy. Rose quietly promised that she'd always be there to help if I needed her. Her support was exactly what I needed at that moment, and I felt a sense of relief knowing I could rely on her. In the weeks that followed, I focused on my work, my kids, and all the legal aspects of the divorce. My ribs were healing, though my broken nose remained a painful reminder of that night. Once Kathy moved out for good, I decided to remodel the bedroom entirely. I repainted, bought new furniture, and transformed it into a space that felt like mine. It was finally a place free from reminders of what had happened. I also made an arrangement with Sue, who would help with the kids whenever I had to travel for work. Rachel, sensing my desire to spend more time with my family, arranged for me to work from the office more often. This was a huge relief, as I could now spend more time with the kids and focus on rebuilding our life. Once the doctor finally cleared me, I felt ready to pursue new feelings. I invited Rose to dinner, and this time I decided to take things a step further. Instead of sitting in my usual chair, I joined her on the couch, a little closer than before. After a few minutes of conversation, I put my arm around her, and she smiled at me shyly. "What are you up to tonight?" she asked with a curious smile, her eyes softening. "The doctor said I'm completely healed, so I think it's finally time to make this move." I grinned and leaned in to kiss her. She looked away slightly, but eventually allowed it. It was the moment I had been waiting for, and it made me feel that life could still be bright again. We had an unforgettable evening, and after that, our relationship gradually grew closer. Rose was no longer just a friend or the officer who'd helped me through a dark time. She became someone who offered me warmth, support, and true companionship. The following months settled into a steady rhythm. I found balance between work, time with the kids, and spending evenings with Rose, even if they weren't as frequent as I would have liked. Every moment we shared felt special. But I noticed that Rose was holding back, as though something was stopping her from fully letting go. She would occasionally withdraw emotionally, though she tried not to show it. Meanwhile, Fiona and I were finally getting close to finalizing the divorce. She'd prepared a fair settlement for Kathy, but her lawyers initially turned it down, asking for more. Over time, I learned that Kathy's affair with Tom had started 6 months before I caught them. It had all begun at a party hosted by my former friend Dan, when I was out of town. Dan had drawn her into his crowd, and things escalated from there. With the evidence we provided, I managed to secure full custody of the kids. Kathy was only granted 2 supervised visits a month. She received her share of the assets, but the most important thing was that I had my children and a chance to rebuild my life. Fiona even managed to exclude any possibility of alimony. Rachel, seeing my desire to move forward, gave me even greater responsibilities at work, allowing me to thrive both professionally and personally. When it was all finally over, I felt as though I'd broken free from a heavy weight. Now, I was ready to focus on what truly mattered: my kids and the opportunity to find real happiness. After the divorce, life began to change. I devoted more time to my kids and frequently spent time with Rose. We weren't rushing our relationship. We gave each other space, but our connection grew stronger every day. She still remained somewhat guarded, but I could see her slowly starting to trust me. Soon after the divorce was finalized, Rose decided to end our romantic relationship. She told me she wanted to stay my friend but didn't see a future for us romantically. It was tough, but I respected her decision. We agreed to remain friends and later met up occasionally for lunch or dinner. About a month later, I began opening myself up to new possibilities. Focusing on my children gave me the strength to keep moving forward. One evening, after coming home from a walk with the kids, I heard a soft tapping at the door. Thinking it might be a stray animal or some random passerby, I opened the door and saw Kathy. She stood there, barefoot and without a coat, looking exhausted and lost. It was close to 1 a.m., and she seemed as if the entire world had turned its back on her. Realizing she needed help, I guided her to the bathroom without a word, filled a hot bath, and turned on her favorite show, I Love Lucy, to help her relax. She slowly warmed up as I made her a simple grilled cheese sandwich and poured a glass of water. Kathy ate in silence, looking afraid I might throw her back out. Later, I brought her one of my robes, showed her to the guest room, and told her we'd talk in the morning. It was a strange moment, filled with mixed emotions. Despite everything that had happened, I felt obligated to help her. All I could do was stay calm and ensure that the kids didn't get involved. The next morning, I decided to give Kathy a chance to see the kids. I brought Hope and Jack to her room, and they joyfully ran to their mom. Kathy cried, hugging them as if she hadn't seen them in years. Watching them together was hard, but I understood that she, too, was suffering from her mistakes. Once the kids were occupied with their toys, I sat down with Kathy at the kitchen table to talk. Kathy, you can't stay here forever. I need to know what's going on. I began, looking her in the eye. With a sigh, she started explaining. My family never accepted you. They thought you were too soft, and they made me believe you were cheating every time you traveled. Eventually, I started believing them. Then Dan. He dragged me into his world, and I lost sight of everything that mattered. She confessed that her family had used her, forcing her to do all the hard work around the house, taking loans from her and even taking her car. Her father had been writing checks from her account until she was nearly broke. 2 days ago, she found out about all this and realized they'd only manipulated her. I felt a surge of anger, but I stayed calm and offered to help. First, we'll go to the bank, then file a police report. You don't have to press charges, but they need to know you won't tolerate this anymore. I told her. Kathy nodded, finally realizing the weight of her choices. We headed to the bank, where we discovered her father had drained almost $100,000 from her account. Then we went to the police, where I asked to speak with Rose. She was surprised to see us together but listened to the whole story attentively. Rose promised to investigate, and within days, Kathy's belongings were returned, including her car. Her family had been forced to repay $25,000 immediately and sign a loan agreement for the remaining amount. It was a tough experience for both of us, but I felt as though I'd finally closed a chapter on the past and given her a chance to start over. I emphasized that she was still the mother of my children and could rely on my support, as long as she respected my conditions. After our conversation, I offered Kathy a place in the guest room under strict terms. If you want to stay here and see the kids, you'll have to follow certain rules. That means helping around the house, taking care of the kids, and continuing therapy, I said directly, watching her reaction. She hesitated but eventually agreed. We decided to keep everything strictly platonic. Gradually, we settled into a new routine, and Kathy began reconnecting with the kids. Working around the house, even in simple ways, seemed to give her a sense of purpose. Over time, even Hope and Jack grew closer to their mom, happy to have her around again. I continued working closely with Rachel, who offered me even more responsibilities at the company. With her support, I felt ready to truly leave the past behind and focus on what mattered. Rachel's encouragement helped me regain my confidence and find a sense of purpose. As time passed, I realized I was open to a new life. Rose remained a good friend, supporting me whenever I needed it. After all the challenges, I finally felt free of the past and ready to move forward. My family, though different now, had become my foundation of peace and happiness. Now, I know that the key to happiness is learning to appreciate what you have and letting go of what no longer serves you. I've become stronger, more decisive, and I'm ready to embrace the new possibilities ahead. My kids and I have built new traditions, and every day feels like a step toward a brighter future.